processing leadership ideas and thoughts and challenges that we see and have in our profession, but in our lives too. And Amy and I were just talking about one of the really interesting insights that keeps getting raised as people are comparing generations in the workplace and are really looking at the differences in the way people think and feel about this kind of interesting and challenging hustle culture that certainly baby boomers, but also Gen Xers, perhaps, maybe even older millennials have this intent to work hard and keep striving and achieving and working a punch list and trying to figure out how to get ahead and what's next and let's manage projects and make long lists of things to do and focus on what's not done yet. And I've been really feeling that when I read about it. I mean, because it hits me like between the eyes and maybe a real big poke right in the center of my chest, because I'm an achiever in the Strengths Finder. It's my number one talent or gift, achiever. And in achieving, I only focus on what's to do, not what's done. And I don't spend a lot of time appreciating what I've accomplished or what anybody else has either. Right. I don't stand at a summit or even a plateau and look around and say, oh, look at all this. Instead, I just say, gosh, so much more to do. And that is not attractive to NextGen folks. It's not part of their value system. It feels unnecessary, stressful, and maybe anxious making. And that speaks to me. Mm-hmm. I jump out of bed every day thinking, oh my gosh, what have I got to do today to make sure no balls drop? And I mean, that's, like I jump out of bed, oh, whatever I got to get done. And there are apparently a lot of other people that don't do that. And I'm like, that's a way of living that I need to learn about. So anyway, I thought that we might process that a little bit, see where that takes us. What do you think?
Yeah. And I wonder too, is it generational or is it the wiring, type of personality you are, amount of responsibility you have in life too? Because it is a different level of responsibility and there's different level of stresses depending on what part of your career you're on, whether you're on the climb or whether you are responsible for the people on the climb. So, and the impact of the things that you do have far-reaching impacts. So, there is a sense of, I think, that's important about it when you have a position of responsibility that you do care, that you do have, it's not just work, it's that there's purpose behind it. It matters. And I think that is really, when you talk about generational, maybe a different way of thinking about work where, this generation is definitely more purpose driven. And in the way that they make their choices for their careers and the things that they do. And that may be newer for our generation, right? Like work was work and you just had this expectation of, it may not be fun, but that's what work's supposed to be. Versus, now I think it's an overall arching, and I think honestly, COVID shifted it a lot for a lot of people of why do I do what I do? And is it worth it to be this stressed, right? Like, and what can I let go of, and having that observation of it. But, I think too many times it's looked at differently in the generations, like they don't care. They're not striving as hard when they're younger, which I haven't seen that at all, at least with my children. and when we've done events with young accountants and so forth, they still have that look in their eye that they want to succeed just like we did. It's just whether the way that we work aligns. And I have to say, again, with age, I don't think my generation was any different. We just didn't speak up. We didn't, actually
Call it
look
out.
for options for change. If it wasn't going to be a certain way, it was all we ever knew. And that expectation has changed, and the world has changed. And that just happens to be a generation coming in. But it's also the messages, like I've seen too, where the messages in an organization is about work-life balance and how important it is. And so someone coming into the organization being young believes that that's true. And then it doesn't actually happen the way that the messaging was or the way that they understood it coming in, because we all come from different perspectives. And
Yes.
I think it's important that we're not just saying things, that we're doing it. So like in your example, Jen, we talk about all the time of decompressing and making, but if we want others in our organization to do that, we've got to be the example of it, no matter what our generation is.
For sure. And while you were talking, one of the thoughts that came into my mind is like, I don't work to work.
Yeah.
My mom used to say that her rental house business was her ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And back then, I was a little bit skeptical because she just really let a lot of people off the hook, if you will. But that was what she ran this thing, and it was her ministry. It called her out of bed every day to make a difference. And I have always felt about my work that it's like a ministry, like I feel really tied to a mission and a vision and transformation and possibility and all these things. So I don't think I'm working without purpose.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, Emily put in the chat here, live to work or work to live.
Right.
Which is another, another saying that's out there, or YOLO, you only live once. These phrases have been coined because there's this perception that, like, man, you could get lost in your work and miss life.
Mm-hmm.
And I struggle with that because I have a husband who I've been with we just celebrated 35 years of marriage, and thank you. And we've been together for 41 years, and he's my best friend, and I get to hang out with him a decent amount. And I have 3 daughters, and I feel like I live extra large outside of work, but also my work is all relational,
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the joy of life is relationships, and I have a bunch from work, so it's an interesting thing, like maybe not being present enough to all the benefits and the gratitude and that brings, instead of just focusing on what do I have to do next, this idea of almost task-based or something.
Mm-hmm.
That the list is so big, and it's like a scrolling, almost a news feed in a screen in my head, scrolling the list electronically up there in my brain. That makes me stop and think, man, I'd love to have that calm down. And of course, meditation helps, exercise helps. We've talked about all being in nature. There's 1,000 things that help with it. But anyway, I do think that this is just an interesting discussion to have and reflect on for all of us, because if we feel like all we have is work, that is not attractive to the next. It's not attractive to future leaders. They're 100% committed to have a really big life, not just a work life.
Right.
And I do know that in our succession planning and retirement coaching that we do encounter people that don't have much going on outside. Mm-hmm. And when they have to let go of work, it's like the death of something huge
Mm-hmm.
in their life,
Mm-hmm.
and they have to completely rebuild a life to be healthy. You hear about people dying after they retire, quickly after, and that's because they didn't build something out there. It didn't call to them. So anyway, just some reflections on this idea.
Yeah. Well, and fitness, all of that are ways to set boundaries. And that's really what this is about. It's not about that you care less. It's that the boundaries are in place and you respect the boundaries and you respect other people's boundaries as well. But if you don't respect your own boundaries, it's hard to be an example for others, right? And that's the awareness piece that becomes so important in this conversation, that it's not judgment or anything to that extent. It's really stopping to pause and be aware of what is happening and being brutally honest with yourself, and all of us being brutally honest with ourselves of, we can love what we do and we can have lots of purpose, but if we get burnt out, we don't serve anybody and we can't serve our purpose. And so, I think it's important, everything that's happened in, the world, and how, maybe we view a generation different and so forth, but it's always possible to change and transform. And the only way we do that is by being aware of it every single day. And so when we catch ourselves crossing our own boundaries or when we hear messages from others of crossing those boundaries, what do we do with that information? Do we decide to get mad about it or frustrated, or do we decide to take action and take little steps to make a shift? And it's usually just a little thing we have to do. It's just a matter of finding the thing that we can do each day that will keep us aware of setting those boundaries.
Yeah. Well, and also I was just thinking that, like, I'm fortunate that I have people on my team who tell me what they see me doing or make requests of me to change something, or, like observe that you need to rest this weekend, or, like I get some upward coaching and some peer coaching from my colleagues. And I think I could use more of that,
Yeah.
and I could invite it more. I could say, hey, how could I make sure that you feel empowered not to live some hustle culture you're not bought into because of how I am? What could I do to make sure you feel okay about working the way that will work for you and that makes sense for you with your life? Are you getting enough life? What can I do to empower you having more of it?
Yeah.
Like, I think there's a palms up opportunity as I'm processing this with you for me to invite more feedback, because I have some very smart, very bright, and loving team members who I'm sure would have ideas for me, for us as a firm. So that's something I definitely think I will do, and other leaders could do, that might help reflect more of a shared set of cultural values instead of just the top leaders' values.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that community is so important. And I know, in my own business, we stop and plan every 6 months, because that's about the time we start getting off track of whatever we intended and started taking on more, or let me say me taking on more. Um, and, and it kind of right sizes it of like, what do we need to stop doing right now? It's not necessarily start, because unless start is going to help the stop. Because usually, at least in with myself, I see opportunity and then I'm trying to balance it. And I want to make sure that I have those guardrails. And that's why I set that up, with my team and so forth. So I do think that we have accountability ourselves to set those goals for ourselves. And then we have accountability to our team, to our family, to our friends. And it's bringing people along that journey of like where you're confused on a transition, and it can be like the littlest shift. Like I did a podcast yesterday with Chet Bookman, and it was interesting him talking about how they did their workplace transformation. But like the first thing they had to do was stop coming in at 5:30 a.m. to work. And it was the partners that had to keep each other accountable, right? To not do it. So it seems like you have to do these big things to make a shift. And, and he was remembering his walk of shame coming in at 7 a.m., walking past those partners. But if he didn't do it, like it wasn't going to shift. And then that's the example for everybody else in the organization. And that's not the example they wanted. And so a lot of people will say they want change, but then they're so seeped in habit that if we don't have that accountability with one another, it's very hard to shift. And it's usually these tiny little shifts, like 5:30 a.m. to 7 a.m., 7 a.m. to 8 a.m., like whatever that is. If you've been doing it your whole life, it's hard to break. Like, what are you going to do at that time? Are you going to sleep? Are you going to read? Are you going to meditate? Are you going to take a walk? Like, what will you do at that time instead of coming into the office?
You could work and timestamp your stuff to send at 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
If you couldn't, work from home. And I was just thinking about how the chronotype, if I worked in an organization that required 5:30 a.m. work, I would just stay up. I'm a night owl, man. 5:30 would be crashing.
Yeah.
That's where I'm getting a few hours of sleep usually. I mean, I was up today to run, so sometimes I get up there for that, but not for work. Interesting, super interesting reflection that they made. And, I just was thinking that flexibility, the more workplace flexibility that you offer, and the more anytime, anywhere work really, and the more empowered people are to speak up and give feedback and push back on things they don't think reflect what we're committed to, the more empowered people are. I think those things are super helpful.
Yeah.
To support this kind of one size fits one, approach or hustle or whatever you want to call it. Just letting people fit it all in and make it work. But I know there's work to do for me on it, and I know there's a reason that my news feed keeps giving me these messages about that generational difference in particular. And it's really a language thing. I'm sure I had the same thoughts when I was their age, you know what I mean? So, it's just about like, what should we change so that we can embrace this next group of people and really make it an organization they want to be part of, and they might even want to own someday. Yeah. And you can't do that unless you talk to them and listen and then make those little refinements for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. But I also need to stop, I need to pay attention when I'm busy listing the stuff that's not done and stop and pick one or two things that I can point to that I am happy are done, proud of, appreciated. Yeah.
Yes.
Just as a counterbalance. And that's a practice. That's going to be a practice.
Mm-hmm.
So something I'm committing to practice. I'll let you know how it goes, folks.
Okay.
And if you have any tips, let me know. Amy, I so appreciate the opportunity to process ideas with you on Fridays. I think are we doing a post-engage session next week or no?
Not next week.
Caroline says no.
Yeah.
So in a couple weeks, Amy and I are going to get to connect at Engage, AICP Engage. Hope to see you there. Let us know if you are. And I'm leading a run. Are you leading yoga?
Yep.
Yes.
Monday
So
and Wednesday.
join us for
Yeah.
fitness.
Yeah.
We would love to hang out with you for that. Anyway, we'll process what we got out of that in our next leadership lunch chat. So thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a great weekend.